You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show. You're listening to the Barbell Logic podcast. This is another coaching success series. I'm your host, Matt Reynolds, and I want to dive right in today with unit economics. Man, the stats you need to know the health of your business. And I think a lot of times this is for business owners, this is sort of like if you were ever had that time period in your life where maybe you were in college or in your early 20s and the bills came in the mail and you just didn't open the mail because you didn't want to see the bills. And I think a lot of business owners treat unit economics the same way. They don't have a good handle on their financials. Look, I think over the long haul, you need to invest in a great accountant, in great insurance, and a great attorney. Those things have saved my ass many, many times. However, even from the earliest days of the business, I always wanted to have a good handle on the finances because I want to know, listen, not all of the unit economics we're going to go through today, even if you run a healthy business, are going to be healthy. But I want to know the places that I need to improve in the business. And unit economics, what it really does, and we'll talk about kind of macroeconomics as well for the business. We'll talk about the big numbers as well. But ultimately, you want to know that each individual client, you want to know how much money that client is making you, like for real, like literally how much money that you're making. And we figure that out. We find that out by unit economics. So I'm going to walk through a handful of some of what I think are the most important metrics that you keep for your business. You don't need an accountant to keep this stuff. You can do this on a spreadsheet, on a basic Excel or Google spreadsheet. You can certainly use QuickBooks Online or one of the other softwares that does this. But in the beginning, you don't need that. As a matter of fact, I actually think it's better in the beginning to just do this on a spreadsheet because you'll have a better handle. You should be the person doing the math on this for the first year or so of your business. And then as time goes on, you'll start to have software and people that help collect that and they'll report that back to you. But again, this is really a podcast for new business owners trying to get their businesses established, specifically their coaching business. And I want to talk through some of the things that I'm seeing and really important metrics to dive into. And so let's dive right in. So the first major metric that probably everyone knows, you should definitely know this, is your gross revenue, right? And that's just top line revenue. That literally means how much total money is coming into your business every month, right? And we also look at that per quarter and per year. But in the beginning, monthly is the way to look at it. We want to split this up basically by month. Now, you should already know that, right? So if you're coaching, you should know I've got $3,000 coming in or $3,200 or $5,500, whatever it is. That is the top number, right? That's before expenses or anything else. If you're doing this right, you've listened to the podcast for several weeks, you've got a bank account, all of the money that gets charged to your clients should get deposited into that bank account, right? Checks, cash, credit cards, Stripe fees, Stripe payments, all that kind of stuff. All that gets auto deposited into that account. And that account tells you every month when they send you the bank statement, you'll know, you can just pull up your online banking even on a daily basis and see how much money has come in that month. As a matter of fact, for us, we process really virtually everything, almost 100%, I guess with the exception of the government contracts, get processed through Stripe. And those Stripe payments get auto deposited into our account within a couple days. Same thing if you're a TKC licensee, it runs through Stripe and gets auto deposited to your account. It doesn't deposit to our account and then get deposited to your account. So very quickly, you can see what your gross revenue is. And everyone should know that, right? Number two, if we look at a financial statement, the first thing we're going to subtract from that gross revenue is our cost of goods. And cost of goods is a little bit strange for service industries. For cost of goods, if you're making a thing, if you're making a product, you're making a widget, the cost of goods, or how much did you have to pay for all the parts to put together to make that widget and get that widget out. For a service company, your cost of goods typically is payroll that's not owner payroll, right? So if you have coaches that work for you, just like at Block, our cost of goods for Barbell Logic online coaching is primarily is payroll back to our coaches. We try to pay our coaches well. So if we charge whatever, $235 and we pay the coaches out 60, 65, 70%, depending on what level of coach they are, then we can take that directly out of the cost of goods. And that leaves us with our gross profit number or gross margin. Gross profit and gross margin are the same thing. That's just total revenue or top line revenue minus your cost of goods. Now, for a SaaS company, for a software as a service company like TKC, that cost of goods is also going to include things like hosting, paying AWS to host the actual software itself, paying Vimeo to host the videos. It's all of that internet cost to actually run the software. That is your cost of goods. And then, of course, again, if you make a product or sell a product, it's the cost of purchasing all the parts to put that product together. That's your cost of goods. But for many of you, if you're a one-man team as a coach, your cost of goods is really basically zero because you are your payroll. Now, you could take that payroll out of cost of goods. That's your choice if you want to put your payroll. But as a one-man show, your payment to yourself is really a dividend based on how much net profit, which we'll get to here in a minute, you make. You're the last person to get paid, right? Like when you're the owner, that's the deal. Like you've got the freedom to run the business and work when you want and where you want, often those things. But also you're the last person to get paid. But you're also the last person, as Scott says, to get fired because you run the business, right? So the most important metric that we have to start with is your top line revenue or your gross revenue. That's the same number, and the cost of goods. Now, top line revenue and cost of goods and gross margin, those are not unit economics. The very concept, the term unit economics means what is my revenue per client or per ticket purchase or per widget that I sell or whatever that is, right? And so these are still macroeconomic pieces to your business, but we need to know those to get to the unit economics, right? So I think one of the most important and maybe the most important metric in a business, especially in a coaching or fitness service business, is churn. And churn is just the percentage of clients you lose every month. So if you have 100 clients and on average you lose 3 clients, your churn is 3%. And by the way, that's pretty close to what Blocks is. Blocks, sometimes we're under 3 and, in the 2.5% range, which is excellent. Sometimes you're over 3. 3 is great. In the service industry where you don't have contracts, you think about a company, maybe you've got a 2-year contract on your cell phone. Their churn rate for AT&T is very low because they have a 2-year contract. The churn rate on a major corporate software like Salesforce or HubSpot or, where you're deeply integrated in the software is extremely low because the process of changing over, we use HubSpot at Barbell Logic. If I were going to move from HubSpot to Salesforce, the amount of work that would have to be done is unbelievable. And so we just pay for HubSpot. And so their churn is going to be much lower in that business to business enterprise software. That's going to have the lowest churn. That's, by the way, that's why a lot of investors really like to invest specifically in SaaS companies that focus on enterprise software because the churn is so low. One of the interesting things about Barbell Logic is I've pitched Barbell Logic to investors over the years is that we now have 8 years of traction showing that our churn has gone from about 5% in those early years to under 3% over the last several years. So our churn has gotten lower and lower with no contracts. And most of that time with your first month free. So still, 97+%, 98, 99% of our clients that were signing up with the first month free, we're still paying in month 2 and not churning. So churn percentage is extremely important. So what you need to do at the end of each month, here it is, it's early November. You need to look at October. You need to look at how many clients you had and how many clients you lost. And so if at the beginning of October, again, you had 30 clients and you lost 3, right? Then that's 10% churn. So 5% churn and under in the fitness industry is pretty dang healthy. Over 5% starts to get into a little bit of the red flag zone. And 10% churn is danger zone for sure. That's danger zone. Because if you have 10% churn, you literally have to replace 100% of your clients every 10 months. Every 10 months, which is really, that's very difficult to do. So as much as you spend time focusing on getting new clients, you should spend an equal amount of time focused on keeping clients. We made this major change several years ago, and we were constantly focused on getting more clients, and we still are. Several years ago, when we really started to think about churn and trying to save clients, our churn dropped from 5% to 3%. And when you're talking about 1,000 clients at Barbell Logic, somewhere in that ballpark, that made a major difference in the profitability of the company just by having people like Nikki Berman in place to put in those calls, or the coaches. When we start to see the red flags, the compliance or the consistency drop on TKC on the software, we often can see that a client is potentially going to churn before they know they're going to churn. And so that's one of the things, again, I love about TKC is that I can see that. I can reach out. I can send a text if they're not responding on the software, if they're not responding to DMs, if they're not completing their workouts. You can send them a quick text. You can do a phone call. You can get them on the phone. You can say, hey, how can I change up the programming or your training to make sure that you enjoy this? Let me help you get back on the wagon. We've all been there before, right? And you miss the workouts and you're embarrassed and you don't really want to come back. And that's changing that momentum is difficult. And so as a coach, it's really important to do because it's going to dramatically reduce your churn. And so the opposite of churn is retention rate. So what percentage of your clients do you retain? So if your churn is 3%, your retention is 97%. It should add up to 100%. Those are really the same numbers, just opposite sides of the spectrum. What percentage of clients do you lose? Therefore, what percentage of clients do you keep, right? Once you know your churn number, you can calculate very easily what your average customer lifespan is. So again, if you have 3% churn, you just divide 100 by 3 and you end up with 33.3 months. And so if you have 3% churn, and you can start to see very quickly why churn is so important. If you have 3% churn, your average client stays for 33 months. Well, that's a long time in fitness. But if your average churn is 10%, they only stay for 10 months. They don't even stay a year. And so you can see how important churn is. So churn is an extremely important piece of the unit economics and the unit metrics. And then the average customer lifespan can be calculated off of that. Now, once you know those, you look at your number of customers or number of subscribers. We've talked about this before. Number of subscribers, that's the number, because that's the thing that gets you your monthly recurring revenue, your MRR. If I sell, this is one of the things that's very difficult about selling a product. If you sell a widget, you're basically having to calculate, well, this month we sold 250 widgets. Last month we sold 175. And then next month we expect to sell 300, but you only sell 194. That becomes very difficult, because when you sell just a single product, you sell a book or you sell a thing, you sell a one-time fee educational course online, which is very popular right now. There is no way to calculate monthly recurring revenue. And so instead, even without a contract, if you know that you have 30 clients and they all pay $200 a month, then you can plan for $6,000 in revenue next month, because if you keep those number of clients, and not only that, you can actually calculate, if you know your churn, well, it's actually 6,000, except for I'm going to lose 3. And then how many am I going to pick up? Am I going to gain 3? Am I going to gain 5? Am I only going to get 1? And it gives you that great data. So you need to know your number of subscribers or number of clients, and you need to know your average ticket price. So for Barbell Logic, that's about $230, somewhere in that ballpark, right? So over the years, for those of you who listen, I think we started at $179 a month. I think our base professional service now is $235. It's gone up over the years. Of course, we've got exclusive coaching. We have nutrition coaching. We have all those things. Our average ticket price is about $230. And so you could do the math. If we have, again, I'm not saying this is exactly what we've got, but if we had exactly 1,000 clients and the average ticket price is $235, then we know that we've got $235,000 coming in per month in monthly recurring revenue. It's very important. So you know how many clients you have. You know what the average ticket price is. You just take your gross revenue and divide it by the number of clients you have, and you get your average ticket price, right? And then I can take that average ticket price and multiply it by the average lifespan of the client to get the lifetime value of the client, or what's called LTV. So again, if the average ticket price is $200, let's say, I'm going to actually pull out my calculator here, $200, and your client stays on average 33 months because you've got great churn, then the average client is going to bring in $6,600 over the life of the client. That lifetime value number is extremely important, right? So again, you just take your average ticket price and multiply it by the average number of months, or the customer lifespan that we talked about a minute ago, and you can see what the lifetime value of the customer is. Now, let me be clear. That's the top line revenue value of the customer. That's how much total money they're going to bring in. The other thing we want to know is what their gross margin is going to be, right? So what is their lifetime value in margin? And so you can take your gross margin numbers and you can say like, okay, we have 40% gross margin, and you can take $6,600 if that's what the average client brings in, 6,600, and you can multiply it by 0.4 if that's your gross margin number. And that means their profit is going to be $2,640. So you look at your gross margin percentage and multiply it by the lifetime value of the customer to figure out what the lifetime value at top line revenue is for the customer and what their lifetime value for gross margin is for the customer. Next, very important unit economic is your customer acquisition cost, or what's called CAC, C-A-C. How much do you spend on marketing and customer acquisition to acquire a new customer? Do you buy leads? Do you pay for Facebook or Google ads or marketing? How much money are you spending on marketing? And then what you do is you look at how many new clients sign up that month, and you divide your total marketing expense. So let's say you spend $1,000 and you get 3 new clients that month. Then the customer acquisition cost is $333. It costs you $333 to get a client, right? And that's okay if your churn is low, because one very important ratio that most people don't understand is the customer acquisition cost, or the CAC to lifetime value ratio. And that lifetime value ratio should be on gross margin. If your CAC to gross margin ratio is 1 to 3 or better, then you have a healthy business. So if it costs you $300 to acquire a client, but the margin on that client is going to be $900 or $1,000 or more, then you have a healthy CAC to lifetime value ratio. If you spend $500 to acquire a client and they're only going to make you $1,000 over the life of the client, that's a 1 to 2 ratio. That's an unsustainable, unhealthy business. So CAC to lifetime value, gross margin lifetime value, not top line revenue lifetime value, but the margin, then that tells you if everything is healthy. For us, we can see our average lifetime value of a customer at Block is about $7,500. That's top line. I can take that $7,500. I know that we're about a 50% margin, and that's not just for Block, but that's for all of the companies across the board. So that's $3,750. Our CAC is about $130. So I can divide that by 130. So we have a 1 to 28 ratio or 1 to 29 ratio. It's super. What that actually means is that I should be spending more money on marketing to acquire more customers because our ratio between CAC and LTV is so good that it tells me I'm not spending enough money on marketing. I should be able to spend more money on marketing in order to drive more client signups, which is one of the things we're looking at doing right now. It's one of those places that we are so healthy there that it actually exposes the fact that we are a little cheap when it comes to marketing. We put out a ton of content, as you know, and we put out the podcast and YouTube and written articles and ebooks and emails and all these sorts of things. And we don't spend a ton of money on those things. At this point, we've got a pretty tight system. And we use that content, which is never behind a paywall, to drive clients into the funnel. And some of those content consumers become paying clients at Barbell Logic. What I should be doing is taking some of that content and actually putting it into paid marketing and paid advertising to be able to actually land more clients, to expand the reach that Barbell Logic has. And of course, we've got pretty good reach. We've got, great following on the podcast and YouTube and solid following on social media, but we could actually spend a little more money there. And so that CAC to LTV ratio should be 1 to 3 or better. And that LTV is based on your gross margin, not on top line revenue. And then I've talked about this before, but while churn might be the most important metric that you keep, the other metric that would be in competition for the most important metric is your monthly recurring revenue, your MRR. I had even another conversation with a coach yesterday, a great coach, a coach I love. You've got to get away from charging by the session. If you charge by the session, your MRR is nothing, because if the client doesn't do sessions next month, then you don't get paid. Not only that, you can't calculate. If you don't know if a client, 1 month they go 12 sessions and the next month they only have 9 or 7 because they go on vacation, there's no way to have an accurate calculation of monthly recurring revenue. So what you want to do is you want to know that every client is getting charged X amount. I charge every client $250 a month or whatever that is. And I have 30 clients, and I can take 30 clients and I can multiply it by $250 or whatever that average ticket price is, and know that I can plan on having that much revenue come in next month. Now, as the company grows, your MRR number is less important than your ARR number, which is annual recurring revenue. So you take a company like us, where we've got government contracts that pay out on random schedules and whatnot. You can look at your monthly recurring revenue for your clients. Again, let's say it's $5,000, right? And you can multiply that $5,000 times 12 and know that your annual recurring revenue is going to be $60,000. Oh, except you also have, every year you sell yearly memberships at Thanksgiving, and you sell 10 of those yearly memberships for $2,000. Well, that's an extra $20,000 that came in. So you can calculate that into ARR. Or you've got the government contract or some other sort of contract that pays out annually or pays out quarterly or whatever that is. So for most of you early in the business, that monthly recurring revenue number is the thing that's going to be most important. It was actually a tough change for me to go from really looking each month at what the revenue was and the gross margins and the net profit, and move to quarterly, looking at quarters. And quarterly is going to always be important no matter how big you get. If you think about even publicly traded stocks, they give quarterly reports. They have these quarterly projections. Here's how we think we're going to do in Q4. And then at the beginning of Q1, they report back on how they did on Q4. And if they did better in Q4 than they projected, the stock price goes up. And if they do worse than they projected, the stock price comes down. And in private, it's exactly the same thing. In a private company, you can project based on your monthly recurring revenue. Here's how much revenue we think is going to come in this next month or this next quarter. Or we can even project out, here's how much revenue we think will come in 2024. As you continue to grow, you can start to calculate that. And so that MRR number is really important. And then we get back to the macro economics. I have 2 more for you. And all you do here in the macroeconomics piece is, again, we started with top line revenue, your total amount of revenue. We subtracted your cost of goods. What does it cost to give out the service? How much do you pay in payroll, or what do you pay for the parts of the widget, whatever it is. And that leaves you with your gross margin or gross profit. That's the same thing, gross margin. Then you take your gross margin number and you subtract your operating expenses off of that. So how much do you spend on supplies, travel, gas? If you've got a company car upkeep, this is where sometimes you do meals with clients. You subtract, meals with business meetings, things like operating expenses, supplies, equipment, printer ink. You got to buy a new computer because your computer died, whatever that is. And when you subtract operating expenses from gross margin, you end up with your net profit. And that's the true number of how much profit you made in the company. And then if you're a one-man show, you get to pay yourself off of that. If you have a net profit of $10,000 this month, then you get to write yourself a check for probably $8,000 and obviously bank a couple $1,000s in the bank. You can write yourself a check. But if your net profit is negative, if at the end of the month you lost $1,000, guess what? You're not getting paid this month as the owner of the business. And that's why it's so important to have a handle on these. So again, very quickly, the macroeconomic metrics that you need to understand are your top line revenue, how much total revenue is coming into the company, your cost of goods to provide that service or product. You subtract the cost of goods from gross revenue and you get your gross margin or gross profit. You take that number and you subtract your operating expenses and you get your net profit number. Those are the macro numbers. Those are I think it's 5 macro numbers that you need. Your micro or unit economic numbers that you need is to understand what your churn rate is or your retention rate. Churn rate is percentage of clients lost. Retention is percentage of clients kept. Your total number of customers or subscribers, the average ticket price for those subscribers, the lifetime value of that customer, both at gross revenue and at gross margin. So both at top line revenue and gross margin numbers, your customer acquisition cost, CAC, your customer acquisition to lifetime value ratio, specifically customer acquisition cost to the lifetime value, the gross margin value of the customer, your monthly recurring revenue, and that's it. And you keep those on a spreadsheet. And so, it's about 10 or 12 pieces of data that you'll keep. And it really only takes probably an hour a month at the end of the month. So here we are at the beginning of November. You should be able to go back in October, and within an hour, you should build a spreadsheet for October, where October is a column and all of these metrics are in the far left-hand column, and you fill in the numbers for October. And then you'll do the same thing for November, and then you'll do the same thing for December. And then you'll start to see trends over the course of 3, 4, 6 months. And you'll start to see the things that are changing. I can see the trend line for Barbell Logic for churn for the past 3 years. I know exactly what's happened with churn. I can see the trend line on profit margin, on gross margin, on net profit over the last 3, 4, 5 years. I can see that. We've got that actually graphed out because we calculate all these things. We can see when something is out of whack, when we're spending too much money on something, or when we're spending too much money on payroll, or when we're not spending enough on marketing, as I just talked about. Because our CAC to LTV is so strong, we should spend some more money. We should ramp up our marketing budget. And I think we're in the process of doing that. And so unit economics are really important to understand the health of your business moving forward. And it's just like anything else. It's just like if you're a big fan of YNAB, if you need a budget, you're not going to get it perfect in month 1. It takes about 3 to 6 months to really see the trend lines, to know where the places are that the red flags pop up. So, here are the places that we're really healthy and doing well, and here are the places that we're struggling and need to do better, right? But this is another one of those things like systems and standard operating procedures that many owners never want to do because they don't want to face the reality of the financial situation that their business is in. And if your business is going to last, if you're playing the long game, you have to know these metrics. So I am always happy to talk through this. If you want to shoot me an email, I'm easy to find on the website, on the Barbell Logic website. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to help walk through this and answer any questions. You can obviously always send an email to the podcast. You can post comments in when we post this on social media. Happy to help you calculate that and give you an idea. But again, it's not that difficult. And so these are the metrics that you need to know. If you know those metrics, you can have a really good handle on the health of the business. So this has been another episode of the Barbell Logic Podcast Coaching Success Series. Again, this is probably one of those episodes you certainly don't have to be a coach to get value from. If you know another business owner that's not a coach, shout out to Quinn, again, from Salt and Strings Butchers. This would be a great one for him to listen to, or any business owner. These are the metrics that you need to know regardless of what type of business you run, and share it with someone that is a business owner that you know, a friend or family member. Again, we would be so honored to have a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you haven't done that, it makes a huge difference in the algorithm, as well as Spotify, but the Apple Podcast is the big one. Take 10 seconds and give us a 5-star review and say, love the podcast. You know, a couple times a month, I go through and read those. And so that's always makes a big impact to me and to Nikki and Andrew. And so thank you so much for giving us time on your Friday, and we'll see you next week.